Well, where's George Crook? Where's Crook?
I
Well,
don't know. I talked with him earlier. He called and said he would be here.
we're a minion anyway, aren't we?
Yeah.
I'm ready if I need to.
Okay.
I don't think you're going to need to.
That was bizarre last week.
Yeah, and
Well, he
I found
did
out it
that.
really wasn't necessary because I could have just, I keep that waiting room idea, just in case somebody tries to crash the party, who isn't welcome,
Like, who would do that? Come on. You got to be kidding me. Do you think
Fox is gone, isn't he?
Well, they tell me some people still visit his grave just to make sure he's still there.
Or Betty Cotton.
Yeah, well, Betty seems to be a fervent admirer
A fervent admirer?
of Hawks.
That
Oh,
that home has amazing flexibility. Tom, much more liberal, Betty, much more conservative.
but she sounds like she's softening, John. Is that right?
Say again?
It sounds like she's softening. Is there any thaw?
I'd say yes. I think that's true.
I think her love for the people involved is modifying,
Yes, I think you're right.
She's certainly not like your wife used to be.
Well, on that happy note,
Let's have a prayer. I need a
let's have
prayer
a
right
prayer.
now.
Tim, let me see if I can get this up here.
I don't know how you follow that, Johnny. I just don't know.
Oh,
Oh, hey,
Okay.
that's great.
Is it on? Can you see the whole thing?
Yeah.
Who am I?
Yeah.
it's a little small, but I'm leaning forward to see it. Yes.
Whoops, now it's off center. There you go.
Okay.
A little to the left for me.
Well,
I'm going to
actually,
read it.
we're all a little to the
Oh,
left for you.
Okay, Tim's going to read it. Okay,
Tim's going to read it for us. Good.
great.
Okay, so I'm about 2/3 through the biography of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and I'm reading a book that Crook had recommended, and so I came across this poem that he wrote when he was in his last imprisonment, and it was written sometime before he was executed for being involved in a plot with Admiral Canaris and a number of other former aristocratic military officers who just felt that Hitler had to go. And so Bonhoeffer was involved with one of the several coups attempts against Hitler's life. And for that, he was arrested and he was executed for that. And so he wrote this, and I thought, this is, to me, it was a beautiful prayer. And so I asked Tom's permission. It's a little lengthy if I could use this as our introduction. And Tom, in his wisdom and friendship, said yes. And so let me read it to you, okay? And remember,
Actually, I probably said whatever the hell, but
you did.
basically I said,
That's the
okay,
interest of
and go
truth.
for it,
Yes.
Tim.
Okay. Who am I? They often tell me I stepped from my cell's confinement calmly, cheerfully, firmly, like a squire from his country house. Who am I? They often tell me I used to speak to my warders freely and friendly and clearly, as though it were mine to command. Who am I? They also tell me I bore the days of misfortune equally smilingly, proudly, like one accustomed to win. Am I then really all that which others tell of? Or am I only what I myself know of myself? Restless and longing like a sick like a bird in a cage, struggling for my breath as though hands were compressing my throat, yearning for colors, for flowers, for the voice of birds, thirsting for words of kindness, for neighborliness, tossing in expectation of great events, powerlessly trembling for friends at an infinite distance. weary, and this part gets me, weary and empty at praying, at thinking, at making, faint and ready to say farewell to it all. Who am I? This or the other? Am I one person today and tomorrow another? Am I both at once, a hypocrite before others, and before myself a contemptibly woebegone weakling? Or is it something within me still like a beaten army fleeing in disorder from victory already achieved? Who am I? They mock me, these lonely questions of mine. Whoever I am, thou knowest, O God, I am thine. Man,
Amen.
Wow.
Amen.
Wow, wonderful.
imagine.
Thank you, Tim.
I
Yeah,
wonder, you know what? I
that's,
don't know that the Catholic Church would entertain canonization for someone who was not Catholic, but everything I'm reading about this dude is, man, someone ought to promote his case.
yeah. Well, I guess maybe some people do see him as the equivalent of a saint.
I certainly do. I
From,
agree.
yeah,
Well, I would
Heroic.
say some people see him, myself included, as a saint. Doesn't have to depend on the formal
Yeah.
canonization of a Roman
That's right.
bureaucracy.
that's right.
Let's face it, all canonizations take place because some constituency pays for them.
Yeah,
No.
yes,
No.
Yeah. that's
Yeah.
true.
Art.
Somebody's got to promote them.
Yep.
But Tim,
Uh,
somehow or other.
Hey, Fred. Hey,
nice
good
to see
morning.
you. Good morning. I
It's a
thought,
happy surprise, George, because of a snow day. They're all snowed in.
Oh, okay. Well, that's great. I'm going to start praying for snow every Friday.
That would be good.
Has anybody ever read The Devil's Advocate?
Yes.
I can't remember the name of the author. Do you, Tim?
No, but I read that forever ago. Yeah.
Same
Yeah, I
here,
think I
forever
did
ago.
too.
But it really, yeah, Cuomo Neroni was the guy's name that was being investigated by the Devil's Advocate for a sainthood. And boy, you saw none of the practical money, pushing advocacy, all that kind of stuff. Great book, I thought. But anyway,
Can we get back to Dietrich
of course.
Bonhoeffer for a minute? Because, before coming here to tune in, I was watching the morning news, Morning Joe and MSNBC, and I was thinking about Putin. I mean, this relates to Dietrich Bonhoeffer wanting to assassinate Hitler. And I was wondering, is there anybody who might assassinate Putin because remember when Trump was president and people were afraid of what he might do militarily, or would he, if he wanted to drop the nuclear weapon, would a general intervene and say no, or would they not cut the chain of command or something like that? And I was thinking of Putin, who recently said, if anybody intervenes in this fight, they will experience consequences that have never been seen before, which I think people are interpreting as, hey, I've got the nuclear weapons and you better watch out. And Fred, I've been thinking of you because I think on your mother's side are Ukrainians, aren't they?
yes,
Yeah, so I wonder what you're thinking about all this, but I was up there watching it with my wife, having a bit of breakfast, and then came immediately down here thinking about, Putin seems to have such a power over everybody. And he's kind of like Putin unleashed. He's doing what a lot of people are Russians, and there are brave people in Russia who are protesting and being arrested. And so this is what's on my mind as I come to this session this morning. I think my wife's brother, who's a very thoughtful, interesting guy, sent her a text saying, "Is this the end?" And then another big thing that's happening today is the announcement of the Supreme Court Justice nomination. So I think two very significant things are taking place as we meet here.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Related to your first point, I don't think I'm putting myself in danger, but I've just decided to put aside $100 to donate because there are some requests for donations to help these people. I just haven't decided whether it's Red Cross or this other one that was at the top of the list was definitely Ukrainian support. And I don't know if you have an opinion. If we're going to donate, is the Red Cross a good choice?
It doesn't seem to be a miss with them. They would certainly carry through.
yeah, I wonder if there's some, for example, when the Afghan invasion happened, I found out that I wanted to see if I could get money directly to Afghan women or people working directly. And I found that there was a group called Afghan Women or Women for Afghan Women or something, and hunted around. I don't know if there's some, is there a Dietrich Hildebrand in Russia that we could donate to? A Dietrich Hildebrand Brigade or something,
Bonhoeffer.
Bonhoeffer.
yeah. I'm getting mixed up. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, that's right. So, but John, that's a good point you're making, and I think you could go online and just put in, how can I donate to direct aid to Ukrainians or something like that. I don't know. That would be one way of doing it.
I think later today I will do it that way. I trust the Red Cross.
Yeah, they're very reputable. Yeah.
Yeah.
There'll be a Ukrainian embassy in DC that we might call.
Yeah.
How about the Ukrainian? No, wait a minute. What was the Russian embassy that Pope Francis visited
Yes.
today?
Yeah.
God bless him.
Oh, I don't know anything about
He
that.
walked down the street and knocked on their door.
He did. Wow.
Good for
Yeah.
him.
And tried to
They
say,
said he spent about 30 minutes with the ambassador there.
Really? Wow.
Such a guy.
The ambassador?
No,
No.
I don't know.
Francis.
Maybe he is.
Yeah.
But Tim, I thought the prayer was so appropriate for the mood, the Ukraine situation. is.
Agreed.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
I also want to recommend to you, after you finish this biography, his letters and papers from prison. They are,
I do want to get to that, Fred. Yes. Yeah.
that'll be great.
Yesterday, I went for a couple of tests during the day. And the first one was an ultrasound on my testicles.
Shit.
Because I have a
Are they too big?
noisy?
one of them is big. One of them has a growth. Anyway, anybody remember George's, what did we call it? The
Imperialistic expansion.
he was
A
walking around
phrase
the
from
seminary.
Dave McCoy.
Yeah, he was walking around the seminary on crutches with one leg up because he couldn't stand putting it down. It hurt so much.
Yeah, this was sophomore year. And lo and behold, I'm convinced it was mumps. I mean, it was a grotesquely swollen testicle that was extremely painful.
Sure. God.
Remember, John?
Yeah.
I remember.
Oh, it was awful.
Well,
I didn't want to be. I didn't want to be in the showers with you.
So Ned, what happened?
I mention it because I got in there and it was a woman, a 35-year-old woman with an accent.
Reminds me of your hernia operation with with the
Yeah.
nurse shaving you. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, she said, is it going to be okay? Here's what I want you to do. I want you to drop your pants down to your ankles, and I want you to pick your penis and put it up. And then I want you to put this cloth over your penis, because I'm going to be, okay.
Thank you for sharing.
Did you ask, is this being recorded?
I
Anyway,
hope, Tom, I hope you can control the distribution of this video pretty carefully.
Well,
so
well, Gary Lombardi will get this and he'll be on his cruise playing it for his.
and then she said, I'm going to be making a mess all over your testicles.
Wow.
I'm listening and trying to be as objective as I can be. And she said, you have a growth on your right testicle, and that's the thing that's being checked out because they're concerned about it. Not all that concerned, but enough that here you are. And so she starts doing, putting gel on it and moving this thing around. And she said, what do you think about Putin? And
Don't tell me you got an erection right then.
this is a good thing to take my mind off what's going on.
She's a very smart woman. Yeah.
Yeah, I said, I think he's an awful man. I think he's really a bad man. She said, no, you really got to say it. He's an evil man. And I said, that's what you think? And she said, well, I'm Ukrainian. I was born there.
Oh, wow.
Ah,
My family's there. My
Oh
mom,
my.
dad, and brothers and sisters and extended family is there. And what are you feeling about it? I says, I'm scared to death. Just scared to death. I don't know what this crazy guy is going to do. And he's making very clear threats, which are all allusions, I believe, to his nuclear.
There's no other way to read them.
What do you think of
And then she went off and cried a little bit, stopped, and then kept going.
And then got back to your genitals.
Yeah, and then got back to my balls. After I left, I thought I wish I'd asked her how her faith sustained her and her family, and whether what percentage of the Ukrainian population felt the way she did. I didn't, but given her response and her just utter fear for her family, that was the context into which I'm reading the rest of it after I left, that there are missiles going in and blowing things up, and George
Now convoys of soldiers all around Kyiv.
It's just I think he's deranged, and I think he believes that nobody's going to oppose him because of his threat.
There was a video yesterday that I'll send you guys. You may have already seen it, of Putin with his cabinet. And he's sitting there at one end of this cavernous office, and all these guys, well, one of them's a female, are seated pretty far away from him. It's like, Mussolini's famous office. Supposedly they're all clustered together, but away from him because of the fear of AIDS for him.
AIDS or COVID?
I don't mean AIDS. I mean, what is it? COVID.
I mean, I didn't know what they do in their spare time, so maybe AIDS was right. I don't know.
Could be, but anyway, and Putin is like, I don't know what possessed him to do this on TV, but he's saying, all right, now who supports this and who supports that? And these are eminent guys. And the head of his espionage / intelligence is trying to be caught, you know. I favor the proposal to give the Ukrainians one more chance to come to their senses. And Putin basically says, "That's not what I asked you." He berates this guy. And you can see Putin. Has anybody seen this clip?
No, no.
Okay,
So send it.
I'll
Send
email
it
it
to
as soon as I shut up. But he, all right, no, I'll send it to Tom, and maybe you want to. What makes sense, Tom? It's
Okay.
brief. Okay.
Okay.
You know, Putin at the beginning of it is flushed. He's florid. He seems to be having a little difficulty swallowing, and then he goes after this guy, and you know, reminiscent of Saddam Hussein sending these guys out, you know, at that meeting where he purged 60 people all at once. It's a little bit like that, and I wonder if there's dissent in Putin's administration. There were demonstrations, but you know, just another vignette. My daughter called me up last night and said, "Dad, you remember when you told us about General McAuliffe at the Battle of Bastogne? You know, the German commander, the American commander, you're surrounded, the jig is up, you better surrender." And McAuliffe sends back a one-word reply, "Nuts."
Nuts.
You know, and she said, "I don't know why I remember that name." But anyway, there were 13 youngish Ukrainian soldiers on this little itty bitty island. And suddenly this Russian warship hoves into sight. And you can hear all this. It's in Russian, and he says to the Ukrainian garrison, "This is a Russian ship of war. Surrender and lay down your arms, or we'll have to shell you." And the Ukrainians confer a little bit, and you hear all this. And then one of them says, "Russian warship, fuck yourself." And the Russians killed them all, you know, 13 guys, youngish. And I think he said it twice. I mean, it was kind of macho bravery, but.
George, where did you see this? How did you get access to that?
I saw it on it was on CNN. I saw it.
CNN?
Yeah. I saw it. That's where I saw it. Yeah.
And then wherever I saw it, then they show the face of one of these 13 guys who was killed. And he looks 12 years old. But that's always true in war, you know.
Yeah. Well, back to the cabinet, you know, I guess because we've been blessed with having our prior president, I can see him sitting with his cabinet saying something, and, you know, there being some generals who disagreed with him and so forth. So that would be good if there were some people in Putin's cabinet that maybe could have a little of Bonhoeffer's courage.
George said that? Was he for Trump?
Isn't it true? You know, you guys are much more attuned to the news. Isn't it true that there was a general, I can't remember his name, very prominent in the Trump administration, who had an understanding with, I think, someone in the CIA that he would monitor Trump and do everything possible to stop him. And they had some kind of fail-safe stuff going on if he made realistic moves to, you know, press the red button or green or whatever the hell it is.
I think it was Miley.
It is Miley. It was Miley, the chairman of the Joint
Yes,
Chiefs.
General Miley. Right.
And man, when that came out after January the 6th, the right-wing members of Congress, both the Congress and the Senate, thought that he should be instantly removed from office because he betrayed loyalty to the president, and he kept asserting, I don't swear loyalty to the president. I swear loyalty to the Constitution of the United States.
Absolutely.
Well, you know, these patriotic Republicans, they don't want to hear that kind of shit. They really don't. You know, it's sad. And so, a question that came up, it runs a lot through this Bonhoeffer book, is the morally justified question mark. Morally justified question mark assassination of someone like a Hitler. Now, I'm sure moral theologians debate this not every day, but occasionally. And it was the most central, it was a central source of tension within Bonhoeffer's heart and soul, is how do I, as a devout Christian, how do I get to the point where I can justify to myself, morally justify to myself, that I should involve myself in trying to assassinate somebody? And I'm not far enough along in the book to kind of really get to how he worked out that dilemma for himself.
Tim,
But
as I read and thought about that, it came down to the same reason that any Christian / Catholic could go to war as a soldier. War is a whole different ballgame, and the morality of fighting as a soldier, I thought, still applied to Bonhoeffer. That was my jump.
Well,
Tim,
Fred,
who
do you
wrote
know,
this book? Tim, who wrote this book you're reading?
it's the one that you recommend. Zaxi,
Metaxas?
Metaxas. Yeah, Metaxas. Yes.
Yeah, I read the
Metaxas.
book. I read the
Yeah,
book.
that's why I got it, because you had recommended it.
Yeah, and I still would, but I since have found out that Metaxas is crazier than hell.
What?
He's what? What's his story? He went to Yale, I think, and then had a conversion experience and has a show in New York City, Christianity in the City or something like that. But he's become a whacked out Trump supporter, an insane Trump supporter. And I found out after I read the book, there was some criticism of it because they said that Metaxas is an ideologue and he was portraying Bonhoeffer as more, oh, I don't know, rigidly evangelical, I guess, than he actually was.
Hmm, interesting.
I still thought it was an excellent book and I'd recommend it. But.
Yeah.
Fred, do you think letters and papers from prison would throw some light on what Tim is talking about, or would it elucidate his struggle?
The conscience struggle, right?
I don't recall that it would.
Oh, okay.
It certainly does come up in many of the biographies of Bonhoeffer. And there is a certain way in which you could think about Jesus as strictly a pacifist. Tom's sermon about the new command to love one another as I have loved you,
Yeah.
which means self-sacrificial love, could certainly support the argument that you should not violate demands of pacifism. On the other hand, the Catholic Church has always had, from the time of Augustine at least, the notion of a certain kind of war that's not out of proportion and just in some sense. So I think it's a very hard question to answer. At least for me.
Well, I think
Uh,
another
I-
element of the hard question, particularly with regard to pacifism and just war, is that the whole just war theory developed when basically war was petty city-state tyrants fighting one another, like
Yeah.
the war that was between Assisi and Perugia,
Right.
which was, I think, part of a little bit broader conflict between the Holy Roman Emperor and the Pope. But you know, the other part of it is, for half of its history at least, the Catholic, the Pope was also a civil monarch
Yeah.
who also defended his territory and went to war when his territory was threatened, or when he wanted to expand the territory, or at least to expand his interest. So, you know, the just war theory actually has in mind what would be basically hand-to-hand conflict, hand-to-hand combat, not the kind of stuff that we're doing with drones and missiles and high energy explosives, including nuclear explosives and that sort of thing. That requires a whole different way of looking at it.
I think you're right that the aspect of proportionate evil,
Yeah.
making things okay, that's out of the question anymore.
Yeah. Proportionate evil in those days meant that an army on the march would probably get their provisions and profit from
Civilian,
despoiling crops and towns along the way.
So
Very,
I think excuse me, go ahead.
well, I'm sorry. I was wondering, do the Ukrainians have an obligation not to fight under the just war proportionality aspect? They can't win. So therefore, is the violence they're inflicting, and apparently they're inflicting some real harm to the Russians, thank God. But do they have to stop since they can't win?
Well, I think what Tom was saying is the just war theory is kaput.
Oh, I was looking for that video, which I found, Tom.
Basically, I think the just war theory is kaput. I don't know what moral principles really would totally apply here. For one thing, I'm very much of the opinion, no, I do not support Trump in thinking that Putin is a good man, he's a man of power, and I admire him and all that kind of shit that he's doing. But I do think that Putin has a sincere conviction that God and the church are on his side. I don't think he's coming from an atheist perspective, as many of the other tyrants of the 20th century were. I think he is supported by the church. What's the Orthodox Church in Russia doing? Well, they don't like the Ukrainians. They don't like the West. They certainly don't like the papists. And they don't like the Orthodox Patriarch of Constantinople, because Bartholomew gave the Ukrainian Orthodox Church autonomy, autocephaly they call it. And that to them was an act of treason. So the church is involved there in this conflict, in basically supporting Putin's ideals.
Well, the Patriarch of Moscow is a former KGB agent. Kirill is.
Really?
Um,
Oh, I didn't know that. The Patriarch of Moscow. Wow.
Yeah, the Orthodox
He-
Kirill,
But, you
the
know,
guy with the Rolodex. Yeah.
So he went on to become an Orthodox priest afterwards?
No,
No.
he was a KGB agent while in the clergy,
Really? Oh,
as was his predecessor.
uh-huh.
so what we have there is a very unholy alliance between church and state, which is modeled on the Byzantine model,
In what way, Tom?
because the patriarch and the Byzantine emperor were either sometimes at odds, but more often than not, the emperor saw it in his best interest to keep the patriarch happy, and the patriarch saw it in his best interest to keep the emperor happy.
You know, in the
And there was no, how would I say, no level at which one could appeal beyond that, except perhaps the monastic movement. And of course, we have, you know, saints and sometimes martyrs coming out of the monasteries in the East because they challenged both patriarch and emperor, particularly emperor.
You've made me remember that my colleague Matt Lamb did his dissertation under Johann Baptist Metz,
Mhm.
the originator of political theology in Europe. And in the seminar there, that question came up. And the question really had to do with killing somebody in self-defense. And I think they were hesitant to say it's okay. But Metz really ended up saying, if you're protecting others, you are justified. If you're being attacked unjustly, others being attacked unjustly, then you are justified to resist. And I think that's certainly a motive of the Ukrainians that we hear about, who are fighting so valiantly, and as George showed, giving up their lives to save not just themselves, but others.
Mhm.
So that's my take on that right now.
It's a rich one. I certainly, if I tried to put myself in the mindset of one of those Ukrainian soldiers, I would have been hoping and praying that the rest of the world would recognize my sacrifice for the sake of my country. And that's what brings me, honestly, to want to donate something to their cause.
Yeah. I think it's important to try to donate something to their cause. And I think you're kind of inspiring me to do a little research on that too. But
Me
I
too.
don't think it's in their mind.
Oh,
Let me finish. I don't think it's in their mind that they're hoping somebody else will recognize his or her sacrifice. I think it is in their mind that they are giving them all for their motherland. And in some ways, I don't want to get too gender specific here, but I kind of feel that the Ukrainians are seeing Ukraine as their motherland, and Russians are seeing Russia as their fatherland.
that
And
goes
that-
to the fact that, what is it, more than a third of Ukrainians are Russian speaking language?
yeah,
Very significant portion of the
Yeah.
country
Yeah.
are Russian language speakers.
there's
So-
another interesting dynamic for me, because my maternal grandparents came from a little town not too far from Odessa called, what's at that time called Strasbourg, named after the German or French or Alsatian, shall we say, Strasbourg. And of course, talk about, regional, cultural, ethnic conflicts. Alsace has been bounced back and forth between Germany and fought over between Germany and France for most of its history too. So, but these my maternal ancestry were Germans imported by Catherine the Great to Russia to help improve their farm production and their economy. And Ukraine was a part of Russia very much at that point, and many of them settled or were settled in that area I guess it would be, well, Ukraine just off the Black Sea.
Huh.
And
There's
so-
also talk about a Ukrainian diaspora of significance. I mean, I just saw
Oh, yeah.
something yesterday. 100,000 Ukrainians live in LA, or maybe it meant Southern California, including Orange. And when Betty and I were in
including
Poland,
Ned's doctor.
huh? Including Ned's doctor, yeah, or Tech.
Tech, yeah.
Or the good-looking nurse. Yeah.
Yeah. But when we were in Poland, I learned there's 1 million Ukrainian immigrants have gone to Poland.
Mhm.
Many are lined up right now at the border.
Yeah, as refugees. But these are people, seeking a better economic life who come to Poland during the 80s, 90s, etc., post-fall of communism. And I remember reading something that the Polish somebody had said, we don't mind these immigrants at all. They're culturally very similar and ethnically very similar to us. And the more the merrier. And, but, and also I think in Britain, a lot of immigrated to Britain.
Yeah. And Ireland too.
So,
well, it's an interesting comment. You wonder if at what point this Ukrainian diaspora, will they start to become very vocal, let's say, towards our government or relevant governments, that you got to do something, because I'm a skeptic. I don't see sanctions deterring Vladimir Putin, but maybe I'm mistaking that. I just don't see that.
I sure hope so.
Yeah.
I agree with you, Tim.
Yeah.
I think
I myself don't see sanctions deterring him at this point.
No.
One of the hopes is that they'll deter the people around him. The oligarchs, upon whose favor apparently he depends, aren't going to like it, when they can't spend their ill-gotten trillions.
Just before this conversation, I was listening to the noontime news, and a person from the State Department said that China has entered into the picture because they certainly don't want the world economy to be disrupted because they depend so much on it. So that could be important. And
very
I think,
significant. Yes.
I think that might go along with, I think the person who knows more about finance and commerce than probably any of us is Tim. And I take seriously what he said about the kind of sanctions we have at our disposal are not going to be effective.
Okay, so let me just share with you. So there was a time when Reagan was president, who my neighbor thinks is the greatest president, even better than Abe Lincoln, there was a total cutoff of all travel between Russia and the United States. Aeroflot was forbidden to fly into the United States, as well as any carriers that would travel in and out of Russia. You could not come here. Well, there is a town in South Florida called South Miami Beach, and it's a very exclusive enclave of Miami Beach. And over the last 10, 15, 20 years, it has become populated by very wealthy Russian entrepreneurs. I use entrepreneur loosely. And they pretty much have bought up a whole lot of the waterfront in Miami Beach. And then they also bring their own corruption. And I learned and know that there are Russian groups in South Miami Beach who freely go back and forth to Russia. They see investing in real estate in America as a very safe thing to do with their ill-gotten gain. And so I was thinking, and these are people who are here on visas. You know, they're not people who have come here, been nationalized. And I'm thinking, you know what? These are the kinds of people that support Putin. I mean, they got rich off of the distribution of, you know, Soviet natural resources and companies. It's why not kick their asses out? Why not simply say, we're revoking all of the visas of you wealthy Russians who are wherever they are, and start to hit not just state operations like the big banks, but go to these people who have made millions of dollars. But
what about freezing their accounts, Tim?
Well, yeah, you could do that, except that they probably have hidden those nicely with offshore trusts in the Cayman Islands. But no, I'm talking about physically saying, okay, you got 30 days, get your ass out of America.
Yeah.
Just get out.
Yeah,
get
you
out.
can't come back.
And
Tim.
and don't come back. Yeah.
Tim, could you communicate this? Maybe we should with our congressional representatives and so forth.
Well, mine
know,
happens to think that Putin has
Is
the
it-
kind of personality that we should admire. So
I
I
see.
don't know that it might, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
What a scandal. By the way, you'll get a kick out of this. You all know I'm a big auto racing fan. And just before we got our gang together this morning, Formula One auto racing has canceled the Sochi Russian
Good.
race.
Good. But you
And
know
I
what?
think recruiting more of the world opinion that way is a great sign, hopeful sign.
Yeah.
Well, when Carter didn't let us participate in the Olympics, and you know, when they
1980,
invaded Afghanistan, it bothered them. That was the Brezhnev era, I guess, still. But Fred, I have a question on the just war thing. Do you know Father Brian Hare?
Oh, yes.
When Ned and I were on the Justice of Peace Commission, our director, Tom Chaboya, had somehow built a relationship with him and knew him. And so Father Hare came to LA a couple times and put on seminars, I guess, for the Justice of Peace Commission of the Archdiocese. And the guy was fascinating. I mean, he's an intellectual, a brilliant guy. He's a priest of the Archdiocese of Boston who taught at Harvard, right?
Yeah, and he's the head of Catholic Charities in Boston now.
Yeah, oh, is he?
Yeah.
And we found out under the Clinton administration, he was taken very seriously in Washington and was performing seminars, lectures at the Pentagon on the just war theory. And the Clinton administration apparently was taking it very, very seriously. And those were the days of Bosnia, you know, and Kosovo. And I mean, does he add anything? Is his I mean, is the just war theory really dead if you've got a Catholic priest lecturing the Pentagon on, you know, what its parameters are? Question mark.
Well, it certainly,
That
all
seems to
I'm
be
saying,
perfect.
all I'm saying is that it is of limited value in our, in trying to address modern warfare. Now, Brian Hayer may have a different opinion.
Well, you know what, I think the thing of the just war theory that to me is a key thing is that civilians will not be injured. But that raises the questions that you bring up, Tom, that warfare is different. But you know, when Syria was bombing hospitals in some of the cities, targeting hospitals, to me, that's against the just war. Whether it seems like somebody should be out there voicing that, and there is some concern about avoiding civilian casualties. I mean, it happens. Look what happened in Afghanistan when that car was targeted and a family of civilians were blown up as terrorists and so forth. But there's an outrage about that. That shouldn't be. There's kind of a voice against that. So to me, that's one aspect of the just war theory that people may be trying to follow. And in the beginning of Putin's attack, it seemed like he was trying to avoid civilians at the beginning. I don't know what's going on now, but it seemed like he was starting off by targeting military and other strategic locations. But now there's talk about how he's saying that Ukrainian soldiers are being hidden among civilians, as if to say, well, now we can go and attack civilians because there's Ukrainian soldiers there, when Ukrainians themselves have weapons. And you see an 82-year-old woman, maybe you saw that on TV, at the rifle range. Did you see that clip
Yeah.
on the news about a week ago?
Yeah.
And she says, yeah, I'm learning, I'm going to defend myself and my country. So, but to me, one of the major things in the just war was not to kill civilians. Of course, that went down the tubes in Vietnam, you know, but at least the just war theory was putting that out there that shouldn't be happening.
Well, it really went down the tubes with World War II.
Yeah.
You know,
with
the
Hiroshima.
saturation bombing.
Sure, yeah, right.
I mean, in a way, the greatest atrocity of World War II was our firebombing of Tokyo.
Sure.
Dresden. And yeah.
Not to mention in Hamburg.
Dresden.
When we had our Lonergan workshop in 2004 in Mainz in Germany, if you went in the Mainz Cathedral, they had a lot of photographs up on the wall of the cathedral when it was bombed by the Americans. And I remember saying to, I think it was one of the priests from that diocese, gee, what an awful thing we did. And he said, oh no, it was worth it. It got rid of the Germans for us. It got rid of the Nazis. For, yeah, that's what I meant to say. So I don't.
Well, reminds me of somebody saying, "Well, if the means don't justify the ends, no, if the ends don't justify the means, what do or what does?" You know. What I always say, I once got very interested in the German church in World War II and read up on it to some degree. And, you know, they never said that hierarchy, which was a leading world hierarchy of holy and learned men.
Are you talking about Lutheran or Catholic?
Catholic.
Okay.
never was able to collect itself and say, we're fighting an unjust war. We, the Germans, are. Never said it. And I don't know, Fred, you may know this. I don't think any national hierarchy ever said, aha, at last, this is our nation right now is fighting an unjust war, till the American bishops did before the end of the Vietnam, late in the game in Vietnam, but they did say it finally.
Yeah, they did. I think for the first time. But
has
Eric-
anybody ever done it besides that?
Eric Voegelin, an emigre political scientist and a very great philosopher, wrote a book about Germany, and he was born in Germany and his family moved early on to Vienna, where he grew up, and he became a member of the law school in Germany in Vienna. But he emigrated to the United States, and he said, when I asked him, well, why did you emigrate? He said, because, that's not the right question. I asked him, why didn't he call himself a Christian, since he spoke so highly about Jesus and so forth and the church? And he said, because in the Anschluss, when Germany took over Austria, all the Christians, whether they were Catholic or Protestant, were all for it. And he left his home an hour before the Gestapo knocked on his door. He had left for Switzerland an hour before. And so he wrote a book. He was eventually invited back to Germany to teach political science in Munich. And his lectures were on Germany in relation to the Second World War. And that book is so astonishing, because every religion, every group of people that you could think of were co-opted into the war. He shows that, and I'm sure he used a lot of the data that George has been studying in relation to that question. So they totally chickened out. There were a couple of exceptions, but there were so few that it really showed how disproportionate the people who caved into Hitler were.
So did that lead to Fred, you said he didn't identify as Christian anymore, or could you say more about that? Did that just cause him to disassociate from organized religion because of that?
Roughly so. But at the end of his life, he was made a scholar sponsored by Stanford University, and he was befriended by the Methodist chaplain at Stanford, who was in charge of the chaplaincy at Stanford. And at the end of his life, he asked that chaplain. I went to a meeting together with that chaplain about Voegelin, and he told me that Voegelin asked him, do you think I could have a Christian burial? And he's and Hamilton Kelly said, sure, you can, which really stood out for me, because Heidegger, towards the end of his life, his student, Father Bernhard Welta, who was a Heideggerian philosopher at Freiburg, he called him in to say that he wanted him to officiate at his funeral. And Welta's jaw dropped. And he said, "Ich habe nie aus der Kirche ausgetreten." I never left the church. So what a contrast between Voegelin asking permission, or asking if he would qualify, and and Heidegger, who was complicit with the Nazis and so forth, and in many ways, a character, saying, "I never left the church," which I can understand because he did take students with him to the Benedictine monastery at Boran because he so admired the liturgy there. But I don't think that was the most typical characteristic of Heidegger. Anyway, that's beside the point.
Let me just tell you, I tried to call Andres and nobody answered. And I tried to call Susanna. They were looking for her phone and nobody answered. And it's been a long time.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know where I read this recently. The Archbishop of Vienna at the time of the Anschluss was Cardinal Initzer.
Yeah, I think
And he welcomed the Nazis with open arms to the degree that Pius XI came down upon him hard for that, or maybe through Pacelli, I don't know. But by the end of the Nazi period, Enitzer was anti-Nazi, and it was being stormed by Hitler Youth in his residence, and I don't know the whole story, but he was checkered, as so many of them were.
it's the self-correcting process of not learning. Thank heaven for it. But yeah, all those cases that you're mentioning, George, are so scandalous.
Aren't they?
Yeah. Yeah.
Aren't they? I mean, yeah, you go online, you can see pictures of Catholic bishops giving the Hitler salute. Most of them didn't. Now, most of them didn't. It must be said. Most of them loathed Hitler, but they couldn't get away from the Treaty of Versailles once the war started. You know, they just said, well, we, you know, in for a penny, in for a pound, I guess. I mean, they just felt they had to go along with the war.
Yeah.
Well, there were a whole lot of people, weren't there, at the beginning of Hitler's economic reforms, who thought that he was a cat's meow. I mean, what didn't Kennedy support all the great things that he said were happening in Germany following his taking over?
Kennedy,
Well, that would be an overstatement, but close enough. And Lindbergh.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah.
And Vandenberg, you know, yeah. And
Order with
Roosevelt loathed Lindbergh, considered him a traitor. When the war started, Lindbergh went to see FDR and said, "I volunteer, how can I help?" And FDR smiled him out of the office and said, "Fuck that guy," you know, basically.
He was in his heart, that sounds like, from what I've seen, read, a traitor.
Who, Lindbergh?
Lindbergh, yeah.
Damn near it.
Yeah.
Damn near it. But the war had, what he was doing is, I just read a book about the 1940 election. And when Lindbergh was doing his thing with America First, you know, we were neutral. And by statute, even, we were neutral. And FDR, God bless him, was trying to subvert that, and ultimately succeeded. And he really did a minuet with Joseph Kennedy. When Joseph Kennedy resigned as ambassador to Britain in 1940, he comes back to the United States, and it's the middle of the election. And he's the most prominent Catholic in the country, and the most prominent Irishman in the country. And everybody was afraid he was going to endorse the Republicans. And FDR had Eleanor meet him at the docks in Manhattan, New York, with instructions to bring him to Hyde Park without letting him deviate, you know. And FDR charmed him and didn't wind him. And Rose Kennedy was more of a faithful FDR person than Joe was. So at the end of it all, Joe said, okay, Mr. President, I'm going to endorse you, and bought radio time on his own nickel and endorsed FDR in 1940. And it was nip and tuck. And hated his guts ever after, especially when Joe Jr. got killed. You know, but he saw the war as very disruptive to capitalism, and we can't have that, and very dangerous for his family. I mean, he said, "I've given 9 hostages to fortune," and he had. You know, look what happened. So, an interesting guy, Joe. No, they're all interesting. The Kennedys are kind of, I mean, nobody pays attention anymore, but I mean, what a story that was. You know, about that family and their ascent.
Fred, you said something at the beginning of today's conversation about the pacifism of Jesus. You know, there is that scene in Gethsemane where Peter takes the sword out. And Jesus says, no.
Yeah.
Put the sword away. To me, that is that the defining moment of that. And there are groups of people like the Catholic workers and many other people probably through the centuries who probably read that and tried to live it. I mean, what would be the power of millions of Russians who nonviolently went outside in front of the Kremlin with signs that said, "Stop the war in Ukraine," and there were millions of them doing it without doing any destruction or any attacking. And that would be pretty influential, it seems. I think that's what Gandhi was trying to do.
I love Gandhi, yeah.
And Martin Luther King.
Martin Luther King, yeah.
But can you say more about that, Fred? That seems a pretty difficult thing because here's Joe Biden, who people say he can't receive communion because of his abortion stance, but now he's, engaged in potentially a war. It seems like a world leader. You can, there are times when maybe war just needs to be done like FDR. There was a bigger picture beyond the economy of the United States, and that's what Biden is telling us too. There's some kind of world order that's at stake. Hitler had to be taken out.
Well, I thought of that in relation to that question about Bob.
Yeah.
That he knew how Hitler compromised the Lutheran and evangelical church. So he's part of the confessing church, Karl Barth and others. And Karl Barth was the one who composed the Barmen Confession, which started off with, "We have no Führer but God." And
of course, he was writing from Switzerland, right?
He was on trial in Germany.
Oh, he was.
He had to go back, yeah. Actually, he brought Plato's Republic to his trial.
Really?
Quoted it, yeah. So, but at any rate, he would have both known about that aspect and also what danger the members of the confessing church were in. But also he would be very sensitive to what happened to Jews, what was happening to Jews.
Yeah.
And I think the combination of those things were part of his motivation to join the conspiracy to assassinate Hitler.
Mm-hmm. Who were the other people in the conspiracy group? Were they also Lutherans?
Tom Cruise.
Pardon?
Tom Cruise. That's a joke. I've talked about the movie Valkyrie.
Tom Cruise, yeah, Valkyrie.
where he plays von Stauffenberg.
The crook. well, there were members of his fiance's family,
Oh. Uh, Uh-huh.
for sure. And there were others to whom he was close by social relationships, being kind of an upper class Berliner who all went through the pangs of conscience and decided to do that.
His family, I was intrigued at this, Tim. I don't know if you've come across that yet, but Bonhoeffer's family wasn't religious particularly.
No. Yeah.
They were barely practicing Lutherans.
Yeah.
But what were their beliefs? I mean, were they philosophical, or were they deep thinkers, or they must have been in touch with, I mean, being an institutional church person is not the only way people can have values, and be compassionate and sensitive, and they can break through to some universal sense of humanity.
Oh, I guess they were
Common.
German humanists.
Yeah, something like that, or
They
Yeah.
were what the Spanish call muy culto,
what's that?
highly cultivated people.
Muy culto. Uh-huh.
Yeah, there were physicians. I forget who was who.
His dad was the most eminent psychiatrist. His mother was a doctor. And they
Uh-huh.
and the other conspirators were mainly Prussian in their backgrounds, and so I think they saw. I think they saw that Hitler was destroying Germany, and it was not. I don't know that it was so much because of what he was doing to the Jews. I think they thought that he was going to bring about the permanent destruction of the state. What being German meant, and not being German, I have no clue what that would be. But
Well, their lives were complicated because Hitler had made the military take an oath of personal fealty to him. So with all the things that would have troubled the Prussian military class about murdering their commander-in-chief, they had this oath they'd taken, early in the Nazi regime, the military had to swear personal fealty to him as Führer. And so
did the church leaders. Yeah, the church
Oh, I
leaders
didn't
had
know
to do that.
Oh, they did?
Yeah.
Okay. As bad as we were better than the Lutherans, right, Tim?
I think
About
so.
not cooperating.
Yeah.
Yeah. Vogan really goes after Niemöller, who is a prominent Lutheran theologian, saying that what he said about the Jews seemed to forget that they were human.
Uh-huh.
Right.
Yeah.
So there were a few people who were not somehow taken in.
Fred, did you know the speaking of Lutherans, and was Kirsten Stendahl, was he Lutheran?
Yeah, but he was Scandinavian.
Uh-huh.
And he was a bright light, really. Great scholar. He did me the favor of showing that Augustine's interpretation of Romans 5 was really wrong, and that the effective history of that misinterpretation really led Augustine down the wrong path.
Could you, Fred, could you elaborate on that? Because I'm clueless as to where you're going with that.
Yeah, pretend like you're giving us a sermon.
Yeah.
In,
In other
in
words,
street language.
Or lecture.
The person who really gives great sermons is Tom.
Yes, he does.
Yes, that compliment is absolutely on. But you can give us a lesson now.
About Romans
We're ready
5.
for a lesson.
Yeah.
Yeah, please do. Yeah, please do.
the big thing is that the Augustine's interpretation of Romans 5, where Paul says, the good that I want to do, I can't do, and goes on and on about that.
Yeah.
Makes it as if the meaning of the whole thing is the tortured conscience of an individual. But Stendhal showed very conclusively, it seems to me, and persuasively, that it really wasn't individualist, although that's the way
Yeah.
Augustine saw it. And that made sense in a way if you read the Confessions, because that was Augustine's position. In the Confessions, the first 5 books start off with him looking for God in all the wrong places. And then he in book 5 he arrives in Rome from Carthage in order to get to teach rhetoric to people who would actually pay him for doing so. And he, for the first time, he really starts having friends. And by that I mean people who could tell him where he was wrong. And he realized they didn't hate him. They were doing that out of friendship. And so eventually he wanted to get a better job with regard to rhetoric. And he went to the place where the center of the empire was at that time, in Milan. And he was still searching, but now he had Bishop Ambrose, who was such a, talk about muy culto. he really was so, and he knew Plato backwards and forward, but he also knew the Bible very well. And for example, from being rather young, and with the mother who was strong Catholic, he couldn't stand the Bible because of those first 3 chapters of Genesis seemed so childish and stupid.
Is this Augustine you're talking about, or Ambrose?
No, Augustine thought
Augustine,
that.
okay.
And he was tremendously relieved to have Ambrose tell him, no, just read those symbolically. Don't read them literally, like people do now when they say that the creation actually occurred 1,500 years ago.
In 7 days.
Even though the text clearly says that light was created before the heavenly bodies were created. So whatever was 7 days was not what they mean by the 7 days. And so but at any rate, then he started reading what he calls the books of the Platonists. And the combination of Ambrose's influence and the esteem he had for Ambrose, and reading these high-minded fellows who were studying Plato, really shifted him, so that when he then started reading St. Paul, he read them in the light of his the feelings about sublimity and goodness that he had picked up from Plato. But he also then had occasion, as he shows in book 8, that he had many occasions to meet Christians who were so impressive for him that he thought he really should become Christian. But he said, I can't. He had a problem with being more or less a sex addict. And he says, I can't change. I feel like my will is in irons. And it's not until the end of book 8 when he finally has what in another book he calls a delectatio victrix, a victorious delight, which released him, which he attributed to God's grace, and which enabled him to change his will in the right direction. And so, so his thing was always that individual struggle that he was going through in the entirety of his life. And so naturally, anybody who really reads the scripture seriously thinks about what it means to them in
Yeah.
their experience. And so that was very no fault of Augustine, but it did lead to his notion that outside the church there's no salvation and so forth, which has stuck with the church virtually till Vatican II. And then it seems to me in our education in the seminary, we were more or less brought up in that conviction, and that part of our feeling about becoming priests was we wanted to help get people, as many people as possible, into the church so they could be saved. But
So how did Kristen Stendhal, what was the corrective thing that he brought?
well, he looked at the totality of Romans and saw that like almost any very brilliant person, they realized that the problem of the correct solution to the problem of human living is not solved individually, but socially.
Yeah.
And so that was also clear in Augustine's life, but he didn't think about it that way. And so Stendhal just gives the overall. The other thing was, what he really concentrated on was the fact that Paul says, I think in Philippians, that he really didn't have a big problem with sin. He was really okay. He kept the law, but he realized that was insufficient. But he was a good Jew. And so the thing that he said, the good that I want to do and I can't do, really was a rhetorical ploy in Romans 5, but it literally wasn't true for him. So that's as I recall, the main gist of Stendhal's contribution. He was the dean of Harvard Divinity School when I came to Boston, and he was just an outstanding human being. He and his wife.
So did you go to some talks with him or dinner?
Sure.
Uh-huh.
I listened to him lecture any chance I could.
Uh-huh.
And he was funny, and he was good
Uh-huh.
and smart as heck.
Is
So
this,
he was,
Fred, is this Romans 7 and
Romans 5.
5?
Yeah,
8, did you say, Fred?
5.
Right,
Oh,
but
yeah, because George, you teach Romans at the RCIA, right?
Yeah,
Or
in about 5 minutes. But
Yeah, you have. Well, now there's a whole new twist to it.
It's pretty exhaustive.
Do you have any recommendation, Fred, of any Kristen Stendhal's? Does he have any books or papers that if he wanted to read one thing by him or?
Well, wait, when I go back to my office, if I remember, I'll find the crucial text and send it.
Okay. Oh, that'd be great. Yeah. But to you, it was a real insight at the time.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Well, I mean, in a certain sense, I'm kind of an Augustine fanatic, and I followed Augustine's teaching to a tremendous extent, but I got into it more when I was studying. There was a great Jewish philosopher who did his dissertation on Gnosticism under Heidegger, and then he did a dissertation on the doctrine of freedom in Augustine. And when I worked through that, I realized Augustine wasn't really always on the beam, so to speak, the way I tended to think he would be. Not that he wasn't a genius and
Yeah, but he was
wonderful.
humanized.
Sure, well,
And,
yes, yes. But
Can I ask you a question?
One of
I'm
us.
sorry.
no doubt about his humanity if you read the whole confession.
So Fred, so back in the 3rd and 4th century, what kinds of written documents would have been available to someone like Augustine to read and to kind of really get into where he could do this kind of study? I mean, there weren't printing presses, but were there a lot of documents of sermons? What kind of library could he have had access to? Maybe that's a simple question.
He certainly had a library because he, as at different points during the confessions, he talks about reading, for example, Aristotle's book on the categories, and he wrote about that. And there was a fairly large literature about beauty, and he wrote about beauty in those early days. But he didn't know, he never learned Greek, which Ambrose would have done. And so he probably read a not very great Latin translation of the Bible. And he was a great Latinist himself. And he thought this was so juvenile or so undifferentiated that I'm out for bigger game. and so he definitely had his problem with pride, and thinking himself perhaps in too important a state, so to speak, to lower himself to reading the Bible even further. But he really, really, really loved Virgil's Aeneas and the Aeneid, and to a tremendous extent, the confessions are really sort of a Christian Aeneid, moving from pagan sinfulness to Christianity, something like the way Aeneas left the Trojan War and founded Rome. So he quotes about Aeneas's conversation with Dido and so forth and so on. And again, little tips come up that he's trying to write a Christian Aeneid for Christian people.
I'm friends with a Southern Baptist minister who went to some prominent Southern Baptist seminary, and he said they did extensive study on Augustine. What would be the appeal of Augustine to Southern Baptist training?
Well, in general,
Did my question make any sense?
Absolutely, yes.
It's a wonderful question.
Yeah.
Most of the great Protestant reformers were great lovers of Augustine.
Really?
And they liked that individual thing about sin and grace, the way Augustine read it. And so that had a big influence, a continuing influence on Protestantism, a kind of misinterpretation of Augustine. Similarly, in the Catholic tradition, to the Jansenists, who were kind of Catholic Puritans. So that he's falling into a Protestant tradition, or brought up in a Protestant tradition. And it certainly is true that you could do a lot worse than read Augustine. And if your friend does that, that's a feather in his cap, as far as I'm concerned.
So Fred, how did you get wrapped up into Augustine? What was the fork in the road, or who turned you on to that, or how did you get into it? Because you said you were Augustine fanatic.
Well, when I was in the seminary in St. John's, I read a book by Guardini on Augustine's Confessions, which I don't think is a very great book, but it really got me thinking about how wonderful Augustine was. And so then a big thing for me was this, that Augustine was the first one to think of a non-material analogy for the Trinity. And that had a tremendous influence on Thomas Aquinas, because you couldn't have an analogy, which is meaning what you can say about God without really knowing what God is, because God is not conditioned by space and time, and everything we know is conditioned by space and time, mostly. But do you have anything that we can know about that isn't intrinsically conditioned by space and time? And so Thomas Aquinas and Augustine more or less hit on the idea that the human mind is only extrinsically conditioned by space and time. That when we understand and express our understanding, when we discern in a way that we fall in love and so forth and so on, and decide, that's not completely conditioned by space and time. So in other words, when you get a question like Tim does in this group, some kind of light goes on. He can't make himself ask a question. It just occurs to him and he asks. And many times he gets wonderful answers from you guys. And that's because in a way you've thought about that question and reached some kind of understanding, which you couldn't really make yourself reach. Insights occur to you. They come in from outdoors, the way Aristotle puts it. And that's a sign that we're not intrinsically conditioned by space and time. We're sort of between other kinds of animals and the angels, who are not even extrinsically conditioned by space and time. And so God isn't either. So if you want a good analogy for the Trinity that doesn't fall into all kinds of anthropomorphisms and misleading conclusions that you could draw, then these guys are the cat's meow. Augustine, Thomas Aquinas following Augustine. And so that really engaged me again in Augustine. And then I teach in a program at BC, which I helped to create. It's an alternative to the core course. Those are the required types of things people have to study in order to get their liberal arts, the things you have to do, the requirements for liberal arts. So the way that was set up originally, and the way it is in many colleges and universities now, is you have a whole set of distributions of of courses in the liberal arts. And so you take history or you take math or you take whatever it is. And the person who's teaching you knows what they're teaching you, but they themselves aren't liberally educated. And so this finally hit on me that departmental hegemony had taken over learning
Uh,
and more or
mean-
less left out a liberal education.
You mean people being in silos?
That's it. Yeah. So when I had this idea and I shared it with a person who has a lot of power at our university, he decided to get together a group of people to figure out how could we solve this question. And so what happened was, what we did was invite people to talk to us whom we considered liberally educated, and basically they were. A lot of them were what you call great books people. And one of the great books is, I think Tom Cotton's wife was talking about Tom studying all these courses,
Yeah.
hearing all these lectures on these works. And what a beautiful thing that he had a hunger for becoming liberally educated. And so what happened was we got this set of readings going from Plato and the Bible on to Nietzsche, but in the late antiquity we studied Augustine's Confessions. Not all of it, but they did the first 9 books. Actually, it was stupid not to include 10, but who reads all that stuff? You hope they do. And you try to help them, and really serious kids do. So that's how I realized, well, I better somehow get control of more of Augustine's thought. And so that kind of got me going. But then I had the questions about free will, and he wrote a book on De Libro Arbitrio. And it was a big discovery for me during those days to realize that the Greek philosophers didn't have a theory of free will. They didn't talk about the will the way Augustine does. And then I read someone like Gilson, who said Augustine didn't really have a theory of free will. He only had a theory of freed will. So it has a kind of fascination. And if you really are interested in understanding what the gift of God's grace is and how it works, Augustine is indispensable, because most of theology from Augustine's time till the medieval period was quoting Augustine on any question that was really up at any given time. So he, Augustine wrote all these books. One of the most influential was on Christian instruction, De Doctrina Christiana. And it's about the interpretation of scripture. And he really introduces what you might call a hermeneutics of love. So he said, when you're studying the scripture, you have to read it in the light of the creeds, the apostles and the Nicene and so forth. But if you really love God, don't worry about it. You'll get enough right if you really love God. And so he could be so down to earth and smart in those ways. So anyway, that's a little bit about my love of Augustine.
And so the Southern Baptist question. So are there a couple of things about Augustine's teachings that would resonate the most with most of my
Absolutely.
neighbors?
Oh,
Like
so
what?
so he wrote long commentaries on many of the books of the New and Old Testament. And because he was so serious about Bible study, that's what a Baptist
Okay,
is
okay.
about. I was shocked when I met the Protestant theologians, guys who were young ministers who came to Basel. And I asked them, well, they had a time as pastors, but they needed to get more education, they thought. And they told me how they started preparing their sermon on Monday, doing
Yeah.
word studies and so
Yeah.
forth and so on, and reading commentaries and so forth. So they spent the week doing that. Whereas, most of the sermons we've been exposed to in the Catholic Church were composed on the way from the sacristy to the altar. And in some cases, that was by priests.
I'm glad Tom stepped away.
All right, I'm back.
Like that.
I'm
You
glad
know,
Tom didn't hear that.
You do have those priests who spend the week doing their laundry.
and
But
compose their
also
sermon.
doing pastoral work, Fred. Pastoral work,
Yes.
insight into how the scriptures come to the daily life.
Yes.
And that's what Tom presented, I thought, in his
Yeah, he
homily.
accommodates that as far as I can see.
When I was getting over some surgery, I forget which one, I think it was prostate. I read what's her name's book, Ned, Marilyn Robinson's book, Gilead,
Oh,
about a Protestant preacher in a little town in Iowa in the 1950s, and I thought it was the most remarkable book. And the only person I bought 20 copies and gave them away to people. I was so hip. And the only person that ever read it was Herbert. Everybody, even Father Franz, said, George, this is the most boring book I ever read. and quit after 100.
Do you think
Herbert read it, I think, just to be kind to me. But anyway, it's the central character is a 70-ish dying Congregationalist preacher, and he really walks you through his life and the scholarship of the man. He wrote his sermons, Fred, exactly the way you said. And he had a big library at his parsonage. And I mean, he had institutes of the Christian religion and Barth, and well, not Barth yet, I guess, but everybody, and really dug in and had these, these sermons that I guess were like a Fabergé egg. I mean, they were just masterpieces.
Yeah.
And my friend Lance, Ned, is the same way.
Yeah.
And it's. And guess what, guys? Their sermons are better than ours.
Oh,
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, that's how.
Eric, did you?
Oh, it is in
did
a
you
way.
read
When you go from a Catholic church or an Anglican church into one of these Baptist or Presbyterian churches, instead of the altar, you have the place where the Bible is set,
Yep.
and you realize it's going to be concentrating on the Bible and the sermon.
Yeah.
And so that, then maybe once a week they'll have communion, once a month, I mean, but
And that only since the Vatican Council, really.
for Protestant churches too. Yeah,
I think so.
well, the Christian church that my wife was brought up in, they had it regularly
Every Sunday.
every Sunday.
Wow. I know at MacArthur's Grace Community Church out here, they It's I think they do it once a month, and it's relatively recent. And it's all about the Eucharist as commemoration, as memory. It's not a sacrament as we conceive a sacrament.
But there is
way I
the,
understood it growing up was.
here, let my wife tell you this.
It just that I didn't think of it as a symbol. I thought, this is my body, this is my blood.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Did you hear that?
And
No,
No.
not well. No, not
Repeat.
very well.
please, please,
And also, well, they didn't think of the Eucharist symbolically, but as the real presence in the
Disciples of
so-called
Christ.
Disciples of Christ, which was a Campbellite church. They're in many ways, they're very close to Catholics in their way of thinking about this.
Is it not part of what the Holy Father is projecting for the synods, and that the real presence is a core piece of that? Have you not seen it?
Not particularly, but I've read a lot. Well, especially because Tom sent us Bonneau's talk on synodality.
Yes.
It made me realize that I'm together with a lot of at Boston College. We have a lot of Latino theologians who are talking about accompaniment all the time, and I realized that just etymologically, the word synod means going down the same road together. So it's accompaniment for the whole church, which is going to bring everybody into the conversation as much as possible. And that's a whole different way of thinking about the church than Cordeleone or Burke
Right.
would think of it.
Well, for one thing, on the synodality and the Eucharist, the US bishops, they seem to be giving lip service to promoting the synod, but they are very strong about promoting over the next 2 years this Eucharistic revival, which focuses primarily, as I have read it, primarily on the substantial real presence. In other words, let's get people back into not just the Mass, but into Eucharistic adoration, and emphasizing that particular aspect of it. So in the U.S., I think this is becoming, in a sense, kind of confused or put together that, well, yeah, synodality, walking together, accompaniment, that's all okay, but we got to get people right back into, believing in transubstantiation.
It sounds like to me that that's and I may be unduly critical, but a clericalism and an ecclesiastical sense, so that's why the Orthodox Church won't speak out to Putin. They will go to the Eucharist, get people focused on the Eucharist and going to church and forget about what's going on out there in the streets.
It's
if that's what they're
It's a
doing.
risky path, George. Yeah.
Let me make an observation. There's not in any acrimonious way or anything like that, but there is a fissure that runs down the middle of this group almost. And on one side, I would put myself, I would put Ned. I think I'd put Tim. I'm not 100% sure about John. And I'd call that the real presence side. And then on the other side, I'd put Fred, George, Tom, and I'd call that I don't know what to call it, the Eucharistic meal, the Eucharistic banquet, or the side. And I keep meaning to write something to the group on that to try to reconcile the two.
I think there's got to be a third group, but
Okay.
but the other, the other week I was going to send you all the photos. I'll do that, but on my way from where I live into Berkeley, about a 10-minute drive, there's a Church of the Madeleine. Used to be a Dominican church. It's now run by a diocesan, but it's a lovely church. And I popped off there and went inside and knelt down and in front of the tabernacle and meditated and prayed. So you have to add some kind of third group, George.
Well,
That includes-
George Spirit, what does that mean? Does that mean that you recognize the real presence, or that?
Oh, well, I don't know. It's there's a gravitation. All I'll say is maybe it's the hermeneutics of the heart. It represents my coming before the presence of some, call it the deity bigger than myself that I want to be in the presence of, and a combination of just being there and adoration and being taken up into something bigger, and then going back out into life and bringing that out into life, onto the streets where I'm going, the people I'm going to be with, how to be a husband, a stepfather, different things like that, how to be a friend. So, and to me, that's the more important part. If anything, if anything, the Eucharist is a means to the end.
Yeah.
Yes.
How often did Jesus do the Eucharist? Like once in his whole life. The Last Supper, he was doing all kinds of stuff during his life.
Of course, he died
And
on
that's
the
what he
cross
calls
only
us
once
to.
in his life too.
That's true, but in little ways, all during his life, he was dying in different ways.
And in little ways, he was giving the Eucharist in all different ways.
Well,
Exactly.
to me,
Exactly.
But
But
I do think that, quite honestly, I can see your analysis, George. I don't really agree with it. To the extent that there is a divide, I think that ditch needs to be filled in, and
I
not
agree.
just a bridge, but that ditch needs to be filled in and
well,
made,
I think it's worth some
made
time.
level.
But let me finish my sort of research on it. And I'll try to generate some document, which will doubtlessly be very superficial and unsophisticated, but maybe a point to start. I mean, like Tom, I would wager, if you were a pastor today, 40 hours devotion would not be your favorite time of year.
I don't think anybody does 40 hours devotion anymore.
I rest my case.
Yeah.
Well, there is a little church in El Cerrito that has perpetual adoration.
Yeah,
There's a
perpetual
chapel.
adoration is being done,
Yeah.
Yeah, we have.
and I don't disagree with that.
I'll bet benediction of the Blessed Sacrament would not be your favorite thing
Well,
on
no,
Tuesday night.
let's put it this way. It has to be related to how it flows from the celebration of the Eucharist.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
we're talking relational.
Hooray.
And
And what I find is so very often it's seen, at least in the popular mind, and what is promoted by popular piety, I see a disconnect there. To the extent that, Mass is important for two reasons. One of which is it brings about again the sacrifice of Jesus Christ on the altar. Number one.
That's a
Number
heresy.
two is, pardon me?
That's a heresy, right? The way you
But that's the way it's usually seen.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, the sacrificial dimension of the Mass is seen basically in isolation to the life of people, the participants in the Mass, so that the participants basically are there to offer with the priest the sacrifice of Jesus Christ to the Father.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, offer with the priest the sacrifice of the cross. And then secondarily, or not secondarily, but equally, the Mass is there so that we can get the real presence to enthrone, let's say, in our tabernacles for people to come and worship. Now,
Just like-
I personally think, hold on, I personally think that the experience that George Farrick had the other day is not quite what the proponents of Eucharistic adoration would call Eucharistic adoration. Now, because it's much broader than that. You know, Eucharistic adoration, many people would promote it simply as you go in there and you adore, rather than you go in there and discover yourself somewhere within
Well,
a
Tom,
within a dialogue. Let me just finish. Let me
Yeah.
just get to a period. Go in there and discover yourself in some way in an enhanced mutual communication with God through Christ. Now, go ahead.
yeah, let me, because you've presented a perfect scenario. You know, I've had the experience where, Fred, you know how Lonergan's book is? To me, it's like Lonergan pointing his finger back at you. You know, reading Lonergan is, and so to me, when I've had the experience of going to God, and God is pointing his or her finger right back at me and saying, "Hey, I don't need this. I don't need this. You go and do this.
Mhm.
You go and attend. I don't need this. I'm okay. I've got it all. And you're part of it. Go out there and do this and that and take care of those other people and love."
And
And
okay,
yeah, and I don't need even to be paid back for your sins. I don't buy the first part
No,
that you
no.
said there, Tom. I don't buy that of
well,
sacrifice.
I'm not, and I'm not.
I don't-
I was somewhat
That's-
caricaturing the attitude that many in the church have.
I got you.
with regard
Okay,
to
so
the
that's a
sacrifice.
caricature. Yeah.
So
Anyway, so that's how I
but
see
there's
it.
one
I
thing
see
that-
it.
There's one thing, George, I would add to what you're saying. Christ is saying, God is saying, I don't need this, but I want to assure you that when you go out, when you go forth to be humanly present to others in a, how would I say, in a life-giving way, I am with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe
Yeah,
one of the
exactly.
key things from the experience of worship is not that we are, okay, I'm giving you glory, God. Now, don't bother me. We're going forth from that, which I think is what a lot of people do.
It's a lot of our community are of that. And
Yeah, yeah.
that
But
from my point of view, prayer life, whether it's scripture or Eucharistic or Mass, if it infuses me with the Christ-like communication with my family, the people I interact with, each one of us has a little bit of a different piece of that.
Yeah.
But I think it's all related to a prayer life, not an intellectual, but a prayer
Right.
life.
So Jesus is basically saying, and Jesus as the Word of God, the Logos, is basically saying to George Farrick and to John Grimmer and George Brooke and Ned and Tim and Fred and myself, as we come before him, don't be afraid, I'm with you.
Yes.
And in a way, that's all you need.
You know, one thing.
we tend to cut up things perhaps a little bit too much, at least in my thinking at the moment.
Precisely. We
And
compartmentalize.
we start putting them in little compartments
Yeah.
and begin to think that, well, I don't agree with that compartment, I agree with this compartment. This is of a whole. There's a dynamic that goes on.
Yeah.
And when you go and kneel down before the Eucharist, you acknowledge. I mean, adoration is an important thing, not because God needs it, we need it.
Yeah.
I need to see and recognize the grandeur of God and my littleness before him. And then that he loves me so much that he gives me himself to chew and eat, and so that it becomes part of my physical being and my spiritual being. All of that is one. You don't not cut it up and say, well, no, not
Right.
that one.
Right.
That
Right.
one.
So the task is, in the compartmentalizing, is to discover the relationship between the various parts, which,
Well,
which is
understand-
always a relationship of understanding and of love.
Absolutely.
And if that love brings joy, the joy is magnetic. And
Yeah.
I mean, my whole life has been a testimony to that. If it's not joyful, if it doesn't make my life joyful, it's not going to attract others.
Right, which is precisely what Pope Francis said in his first encyclical.
I'm going to go back and revisit.
Well,
The,
You know,
that's
I'm-
part of Benedict's thing is that the life of the church should be one of beauty and one of joy, and that's what will attract people.
yeah,
Yes.
Okay, I don't see them thronging in, but well, you know. So, but one thing I realized a while back is my brother-in-law, the bishop, we'll be together. You know, we'll go over to his house for a couple of days, and I'll say, "So, Ricky, are you going to say mass today for us?" And he'll say, "No." Us pre-Vatican II Catholics, which I'm not really, want to say, well, why not? You're a priest, you're a bishop. How could you not want to say mass? And to him, it's a Sunday is the summit and source, and all that is the Sunday worship. That's the resurrection being recalled and all of that. And there's no real need to say mass or confect the Eucharist, whatever we should call it, on a Wednesday, you know. And sometimes he will, but mostly he won't. Yeah. Whereas Herbert, who was very much a Vatican II priest, he was there for it. He would say mass every day.
Right.
You know, and he might even say it himself on some days, I think, Ned, right? By himself.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's interesting to me, and I don't fully understand the difference, because here are two grandly holy men with a different approach. And one last question. This is just a mystery to me. We are told that the Eucharist is so important in our sanctification. You know, the imbibing of Jesus, you know, it's the school of the Christian life. It's why aren't we vastly better people than the Protestants, who get their nourishment from Scripture, and not a sacramental thing? If it is what we're told it is for the spiritual life, why aren't we a hell of a lot holier than we are? And then the competition, if I can use that term.
You know, this is such a great discussion that I think it's worthy of, because I'm thinking of you, Fred. I don't know if hopefully there'll be snow again next Friday, but you know, Lonergan talked about in spiritual development, the particular, or maybe he was quoting some German theologian, philosopher, but he talked about going from the particular to the general. Do you know what I'm getting at, Fred? Or something like, you know, the specific things like a mass or an event or having a scapular or saying the rosary. But there comes a point at which something is internalized within. Those are vehicles, you might say, vehicles for something to happen within the person. And when you get to that stage, you can do without the vehicles. It's like the Challenger, you need all this structure to get up into the air, but then the rockets fall away, and people go into a different mode where, I haven't received communion in 3 years. And in 2 years. And Simone Weil did not want to become a Catholic and receive communion because of the people who were left out of it. And when I first left, I wouldn't go up I wouldn't go up to a Catholic church and go to communion saying, I'm going to go and receive communion. I refused to because I identified with all the other people who could not receive communion, who were going up next to their kids receiving their first communion and could not because their marriages were not in shape or whatever. I identified with them, the people on the margins.
Yeah.
And so George, you raised a very good question. The question you just raised, why aren't people who go to communion, why are they maybe some of the, I don't know, are they the best people in the parish, or are they, I don't know. But Fred, I think Lonergan has said something about that, about the specific and to the general, or the beyond.
Yeah, well,
I could see if I could look up what I'm referring to in some paper.
He talked about the concrete universal.
Yeah.
And the thing in relation to George's original comment, I wanted to say two things. Lonergan was very, very impressed with Teilhard de Chardin's book on the Eucharist, which has a cosmic effect.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing is, when I was helping Father Rowan during the summers, he took us up one summer to the liturgical conference in Seattle, and I went to the workshop with Godfrey Diekman, the Benedictine from
College.
Minnesota, and also Dan Berrigan.
Mm-hmm.
And what they talked about was, I think they meant that the Eucharist was, they had no way of saying what they were going to say, did not have to do with the real presence. So I don't think the real presence, take it or leave it. Although I'm not, as has been brought up, I'm not saying that people who don't never go to communion aren't in communion. But what they talked about was sincerity of sign. So the sign is the sign of Jesus' self-sacrificial love for all of us, which is unconditional, the way George has put it. And also that now you go out and live a Eucharistic life. That this is a sign that you carry with you and you live it out in relation to everyone that you have to do with, and in relation to good causes and so forth and so on. And I was very impressed by that. And that's what really rung a bell then when I read Thomas Aquinas's statement that the grace of the sacrament is the unity of the mystical body of Christ. And
Bingo.
And that's, then I realized, well, that's what they were saying about the sincerity of sign. It's the meaning of the thing, and the meaning is constitutive, and it involves the real belief in the presence of God in the Eucharist. It's not something that necessarily gets along without it. It's something that makes it possible in a way. And I loved the way Tom put it, that it has a conversational dimension, that in a way Jesus is showing us how much he loves us, but it's also asking us, how is this affecting you? How do you live your life?
Fred,
that's
true,
why, that's why the Mass has always those two sides of every church service in a way does, of contrition on the one hand and thanksgiving on the other. Between the two, you got to come to terms with yourself. But coming to terms with yourself doesn't mean you as an individual. It means you as a social being. And so that's the way I think about it. I wouldn't say that I don't believe or think it's unimportant whether the real presence is there. I absolutely believe it, and I absolutely think I depend on it. And I realize that during the pandemic, when I've been isolating due to underlying morbidities, how much I miss being in church.
Me too. Me too.
But
Absolutely.
I also don't think that I'm apart from it. I realize that that's being enacted in a certain way on my Zoom thing, and I love seeing the people, the choir, and the people going for communion. And I, in a way, part of the goodness of doing it that way is that you realize how deprived you feel that you don't get to be receiving communion. You see what I'm trying to say? So
Yeah, why can't a Eucharistic minister who's been duly vaccinated and boosted bring you communion? Even if you're,
that might be the case, but I'm living with my daughter and son-in-law, and I'm not sure how that would work for sure.
Mm.
Yeah.
Guys, my battery in my earpods is going out. So I think I'm going to have to say
Well,
goodbye.
it's about that time. It's almost 20 after 12.
Yeah,
Hey, Tom, are you going to film your homily on Sunday? Is it going to be filmed for you to share with us again?
I am.
Or are you going
I
to
am.
repeat the same
oh,
one?
wonderful.
No,
Okay.
I'll video it just like I did and put it up on YouTube. By the way, I brought up on YouTube, but never was able to play the clip from The Guardian about Putin that George Crook sent. It's 1 minute and 11 seconds long.
Can you do it
No,
now?
1.5 minutes long. Does anybody want to?
Yeah.
I'm in. I'm
It's
in.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to me.
Okay.
yeah. And George, write that paper about the two types of Eucharist. That precipitated a lot of discussion.
Yeah,
Good.
and
do
it's
that.
all, and it's a unity we have, but there's a slight, maybe it's just emphasis.
Yeah. Okay. I hope that the sound will come. Let me know if it doesn't.
Таким образом, согласился бы с предложением Николая Платоновича о том, что нашим, так сказать, западным партнерам можно дать последний шанс с тем, чтобы предложить им в кратчайшие сроки заставить Киев пойти на мир и выполнить Минские соглашения. В противном случае мы должны принять то решение, о котором сегодня говорится. Значит, в противном случае вы предлагаете начать переговорный процесс? Нет, или признавать суверенитет. А говорите прямо. Я поддержу предложение о признании. Поддержу или поддерживаю? Говорите прямо, Сергей. Поддерживаю предложение. Так и скажите, да или нет. Поддерживаю предложение о вхождении Донецкой и Луганской народных республик в состав Российской Федерации. Да, мы об этом не говорим, мы этого не обсуждаем. Мы говорим о признании их независимости или нет. Да, я поддерживаю предложение о признании независимости. Хорошо, садитесь, спасибо. Владимир Александрович.
Jesus.
Wow,
Man alive.
my God. Can you send that, Tom?
Yeah, I'll in fact, I'll send the. Oh dear. What's
the
happening?
whole Earth is actually one cohesive system. Everything is interrelated to each other. It's self-balancing.
Am I,
And we are screwing up the balance.
That background voice. is
yeah,
still coming.
let me see what let me see what I'm doing here wrong.
Yes.
Hold on, hold on, hold on.
We know doesn't.
Okay.
It's like the guy was intimidated and changed his mind.
Yep.
Well, I don't know if he, yeah, it was weird because at one point I don't know. I'd have to go look at it again. Yeah.
He's proposing further negotiations and then.
Yes.
What
Yeah.
the fuck are you
I will
talking
send,
about,
I will
boy?
send the direct link to
Thanks, Tom.
YouTube. George actually sent me a link to Apple News, which
Okay.
took a little bit
Johnny,
to get to the thing, actually.
Johnny, I think we should send our donation to that guy. He's going to need it for legal
That's right.
legal defense.
It's like Saddam Hussein's famous on TV purge, you know?
I mean, that was a pretty brave guy to be speaking there. Geez.
You bet.
Yeah.
You know,
bet.
And that, I think, is his head of intelligence. I mean,
Is
that's
it-
Mr. CIA.
really? Wow.
He's the FSB guy. Yeah, the Federal Security Board.
Well,
Okay, I've
Putin, I
gotta
think
go.
is simply obsessed with, historically, Ukraine belongs to us, and they're not going to get away with not belonging to us. Period.
Yeah.
To hell with anybody else. To hell with the rest of the modern world. He's just saying Ukraine belongs to us, and
Yeah, I like the
we're
piece you
taking
sent
it
out,
back.
Tom. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
And suppose China moves on Taiwan while we're waiting through this.
So
They're
is
going to have the same argument.
Putin receiving communion?
In the Orthodox, in the
In line with what you're
Orthodox
saying,
Church,
George.
You better believe it,
If he is and I'm not,
because communion
Well,
in the
now something's
Russian
wrong with that
Orthodox Church,
picture, Mr. Farrick. Putin's
communion
going
in
to
the Russian
communion and you're
Orthodox
not.
Church is going to mean
Tim.
affirming everything the Russian Orthodox Church stands for. I'm not defending it, but that's his mentality.
Did you want to do the closing prayer or just say goodbye for now?
Whatever you wish. You're the one who proposed the closing
how
prayer.
about
Did you
Dios,
keep it?
Dios nos bendiga en todo.
God bless all of you.
Gracias.
God bless.
Okay.
Amen.
Everyone, as Tiny Tim said.
Yes, everyone.
Adios.
Hasta la semana próxima.
On the lip quest.
Thanks